There's a delightful story about a football team called the Sydney Swans. They're up in the Australian Football League, and in Australia, football is a lot like rugby, only different. But it's Australia's answer to the NFL and to our football. But the Sydney Swans, for many years, were the exception. They had the worst record in the league. They had the worst attendance in the league. And most of their games were played in front of empty seats. But then a strange thing happened. They got a new coach, they got some new players, and they went from laughingstock to powerhouse. And since everyone loves a winner, you can guess what happens. The stands began to fill by the thousands. Thousands who had shown up never before couldn't wait to attend the games religiously. And soon it was impossible to even get a ticket to a Swans game. If that seems unusual, I can remember in the 80s people begging people to buy tickets for the Patriots. But one day, one Sunday afternoon, as the Swans were playing in their home stadium, in front of a capacity crowd, the TV cameras zeroed in on a single man who was cheering, but he was holding up a sign that says, "I was here when no one else was." I love that story, because it reflects the age-old story of fair-weather fans who are only there when their team is winning. Jesus knew a lot about fair-weather fans. As he began to share the more difficult details of his ministry, many of his followers started becoming disenchanted. Just a short time ago, they wanted to crown him king. They wanted to push him into the political arena. They wanted to establish his kingdom in the here and the now. That's an issue we have today. They were not in it for the long haul. They wanted it to happen here, now. So when they realized it wasn't going to happen the way they realized it, or the way they envisioned it, they began to drift away. Even some of his closest followers seemed to have lost some of their enthusiasm. And this was alarming. John writes, he says, "From this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him." "Do you want to leave me too?" Jesus said to his 12 closest disciples. And it was Simon Peter who answered, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You alone have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God." Who could have given such a response except Simon Peter? "Lord, to whom shall we go?" I love Peter. He's impetuous. He's excitable. He sometimes acts before he thinks. But Peter's in it for the long haul. His commitment was no monetary or a momentary fleeting experience. He wasn't just there when good things were going his way. He wasn't there just when his team was winning. Now sure, Peter got discouraged from time to time. We all do. After the crucifixion, he was ready to go back to the fishing nets. We can all understand that. After all, he felt terribly let down, and he had let Jesus down as well. His disappointment and his guilt were real, and they were raw. But still, Simon Peter was in it for the long haul. He shows us often that he is human, but he sticks with it nevertheless. The reaction to the crowds, to Jesus' hardest teaching, remind me of a TV personality many years ago. It was at the time when the great African missionary Albert Schweitzer was receiving international attention, and one of our celebrities on American television wanted to jump on the bandwagon, so he told his audience, "I'd like to be like Albert Schweitzer, as long as I can commute." Wouldn't we all? Would we all be willing to go to the mission field if we could only commute? It's a common sentiment among those who start off with good intentions. We see that all the time in the church, don't we? People come and people go. People get all involved and then they drop out. We see it in Sunday school attendance. We see it in our programming. We see it when our children grow up. I've seen people who have been active in a church for 20, 30 years have a disagreement or something happens that they don't like, and you never see them again. What a treasure. What a blessing. What an encouragement are you out here. You who are here for the long haul. You have a very special kind of faith, a faith that will receive its reward. And indeed, it may be the only kind of faith that really counts. You see, life, especially the life of faith, but even life, is a marathon. Life is hard. The obstacles are many, and just because we're Christians doesn't mean it's going to be smooth or trouble-free. We get cancer. We have heart attacks and strokes and diabetes, just like everybody else. We watch family members suffer, sometimes die. We lose our jobs. We grieve the loss of loved ones like others. And it's at times like these that we need a faith for the long haul, because life's just not easy. That's why we cherish success stories. Ones of faith or even otherwise. I think of the super successful motivational speaker Tony Robbins. I don't actually know sometimes what to think of Tony Robbins, but he did not grow up with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was dirt poor. He grew up with 4 different fathers and a mother who was an alcoholic. He often went to bed hungry. He wore 25-cent t-shirts he bought at the thrift store and pants, because he was so tall, that were 4 inches too short. I never had that problem. He worked at night as a janitor before going to school during the day. But today, Tony Robbins says, "I'm blessed with financial success." And that's probably an understatement. Tony Robbins is successful in many areas of his life. But such success doesn't happen overnight. It happens after a great deal of effort. And it often doesn't happen for decades, and sometimes it doesn't happen at all. See, life's a marathon, not a sprint. That lesson was taught to me very well when I was a senior in high school. I had dropped out of football my senior year, and I had joined the cross-country team. I know that's hard to believe looking at me today, but I was pretty good. I made the first string, even though I was like the 6th or 7th runner. But one of the guys on the team was really fit. He had lots of muscle, no fat. He could run really well. He was our number 2 runner on the team. But he would get so excited at the beginning of a race that he would take off like lightning. And he would lead the pack in the first half mile or so, often way ahead of everybody else. But we got used to coming around the bend, and there he would be, pulled up with an injury, or heaving over the bushes. He never placed well. Often he didn't finish at all. I was not nearly as good a runner, but I always beat him because I finished. Why? He wasn't in it for the long haul. I may not have won, but I finished. And it's the Apostle Paul who says that those who finish the race are the true, real winners. So we need to remember that life's not a sprint. Life's a marathon. And success comes to those who are willing to hang in there when the going gets tough. One of the worst things that can happen to some people, not that I had this problem, but is to have lots of successes early in life. And then they think that all of life's going to be that way. But it isn't. Life's hard. Life's a marathon. And the great secret in life is not how we began. It's how we finish. You might be a good starter. You might have talent and enthusiasm, and you might start up with a burst of promise. But sustaining that good beginning, that's the challenge. And that's the true commitment in the life of living a Christian life. It's the answer to a happy marriage, successful job. It's true in our lives. It's true in the life of this church. How well are we here for the long haul? And are we able to finish well? When I lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the famous local minister was a guy named Stuart Briscoe. Maybe you've heard of him. He was an Englishman. He pastored the largest church in greater Milwaukee. And he was well known for his books and his public speaking. He spoke all over the world. But he gave a good example of the power of endurance. Again, it's about a race. Stuart Briscoe was a runner. And he brought his kids up to be runners. So one day he and his 3 children signed up for a 10K road race. Now that's 10,000 meter road race, 6.2 miles. It was the most popular of all the road races in Milwaukee, and 25,000 people had signed up for the race. And it was like a carnival. There were people dressed up like beer bottles. It's Milwaukee. There's one guy dressed up in a banana suit, and another is a bunch of grapes. And the gun goes off, and everybody's waving, and they're clapping, and they're laughing. They're shaking hands with the crowds. And then it starts to get interesting. About a quarter of a mile, the banana and the beer bottle are hanging over a garden fence, not doing well at all. About a mile or so down the line, there's no chattering or laughing. At mile 2, there's only the sound of labored breathing. After mile 4, it's so quiet you could hear the birds singing. And at 6.2 miles, 10K, people were coming in one at a time. And not all that many of them at that. The moral of the story is this. You get all kinds of people who are goofing off at the start. But that doesn't count. To finish counts. And the disciples of Jesus Christ, they kept going. When the enthusiasm fades, when the passion cools, when things change and you might not be 100% with it, when the numbers drop off, can you maintain the intensity? That's the mark of a winner, of a champion. That's the mark of a faithful saint of God. Because finishing well is what faith is all about. I told you earlier, I am grateful for those of you who are here for the long haul. Some of you have been disciples of Jesus Christ for the most part for your whole lives. You've seen pastors come and you've seen pastors go. You've watched the church grow along with the excitement that goes along with all of that. And you've watched churches in decline. You've been here through the good and the bad times. Some of you have stumbled along the way. You've gone through times of grief and disappointment. And perhaps somewhere along the way you've given in to problems. And for a while you've possibly doubted that God could either forgive you or accept you. After, like Peter, you've let God down. But you hung in. Human as you may be, you hung in. Maybe you've become disenchanted with the meaningless of life. Maybe you're beginning to realize that you need to draw closer to God. And maybe that's why you're hanging in right now. Maybe you're hoping to have a fresh new experience of God's grace. And I believe that I hope that you will hold in and endure long enough to make that happen. Hang in there. Hanging in there makes all the difference. There was a tale written many years ago by Max Beerbohm called The Happy Hypocrite, a fairy tale for tired gentlemen. The main character was a man named George Lord. And George had wasted his life on greed and gambling, superficial relationships, broken promises, too much alcohol. And one day, as he was having a lavish meal with his lover, he sees this young, innocent woman. Talk about love at first sight. He promptly is smitten. He falls in love with her. He desperately wants to marry her, but she will only marry someone who has the face of a saint. And George Lord obviously does not have the face of a saint. But not long after that, George walks by a mask shop. So he goes into the shop and has the shop owner create a lifelike wax mask that will enable him to look like a saint. He returns to the woman who has won his heart. He proposes and she accepts. And this marks the beginning of a moral conversion of George Lord's life. He donates much of his money to the poor. He repays everyone he has cheated. He treats people kindly, even people he had never noticed before. In short, he enters into the way of the life of a saint. Sometime later, one of his old lovers sees him and seeks to unmask him before his wife. A struggle ensues and the mask is ripped off and tossed to the ground, and his old love laughs in triumph. Now he must turn and face his wife. But when he does, he's shocked by her question. She looks at him and says, "Why did you have a mask created that looks precisely like your own countenance?" You see, while he sought to live like a saint, an unknown, unseen power was at work. He had grown into his face, into his mask. Maybe there's somebody here in this room who's hoping to grow into the face that you have shown to the world. Faith is hanging in there when the day looks dark. Faith is hanging in there when the options are limited, because you know that somehow, some way, God is at work in your life. So you have decided that by His grace and by the power of God, you're here for the long haul. You've placed yourself in God's hands. And you can say with Simon Peter, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You alone have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God." That's what faith is all about. Life is a marathon. It's not how you start, but how you finish. Faith has to do with both having a great race, but even a greater finish. John, in his Revelation, put God's promise to us about finishing the race like this. He says, "Be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you a victor's crown." That is faith for the long haul. That is the only kind of faith that really counts.